Our next presenter is Venkat Ramaswamy, Professor of Marketing at the Ross School of Business at U of M. He is a globally recognized thought leader, idea practitioner, and eclectic scholar with wide-ranging interest in innovation, strategy, marketing, branding, IT operations, and the human side of the organization. Venkat's award-winning book, The Future of Competition, co-authored with the late C.K. Prahalad, introduced co-creation as a revolutionary concept. It provided a new frame of reference for jointly creating value through experienced environments and called for a process of co-creation, the practice of developing offerings through ongoing collaboration with customers, employees, managers, financiers, suppliers, partners, and other stakeholders. Venkat's 2010 book, The Power of Co-Creation, showed how enterprises in over 20 industry sectors were all leveraging platforms to create new interactions with people everywhere in the system. And in 2014, he published The Co-Creation Paradigm, a clarion call to action, not just as practitioners or academics, but as individuals. Here is Venkat Ramaswamy talking about the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And my starting point is actually going to be the fourth industrial revolution. And for those of you that haven't heard the term, basically over 200 years ago, we had the advent of mechanization and water and steam power, which were leveraged by businesses in creating goods and services. And then came electric power in the second industrial revolution, and then computer power. Think IT, think the whole digital revolution. So what is the fourth industrial revolution, a term that was coined by Professor Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum? It's really all about interactive intelligence. Yes, there's large-scale computer power at low cost today, but it's really the internet being embedded in the fabric of our lives. And I think that completely changes the game, transforms the way in which we create value. And the fourth industrial revolution has been gathering steam, pun intended, prior to COVID, which has really been very devastating to a lot of lives and livelihoods, as we know. And we are continuing to be in the midst of the pandemic. But I think what we need to recognize is that it has actually accelerated the fourth industrial revolution. Prior to COVID, a lot of companies realized that they were becoming digital. But as Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, says, it's really not about just buying and deploying software, that every company is just a software company. It's fundamentally rethinking how we use digitalization to create value moving forward. And the COVID crisis has actually accelerated the digital transformation very, very rapidly. And just as an example, to take Microsoft's own case and the healthcare space, Microsoft essentially rolled out its cloud for healthcare service offerings. And as you can see, it really was done globally. It essentially utilized interactive intelligence in the form of bots that allowed a large scale of people at the edge of the network. Remember, this is people in their homes, so you're not going to the hospital, going someplace else to get the healthcare. It's coming to you. And so to do this at scale, these intelligent bots could have natural conversations with people with their ahs and ums and the interruptions, just like I'm doing now, as well as input photographs and just explain their symptoms, for example. And through all of that and with the medical knowledge, everything behind the scenes, the interactive intelligence, what it then allowed the care team to do on the other end is essentially to be able to triage those symptoms. First, seeing whether it needed to be escalated to another level. And so a nurse practitioner would jump on and have a telehealth service with the patient. And then if it was an acute case, then it would then go to physicians and in really extreme cases, be treated, especially with pulmonary specialists and so on. So the point I want to make here is that what you're really seeing here is interactive intelligence being kind of augmented to really create much more valuable healthcare experiences. So it's really about this fourth industrial revolution being embedded in our lives and livelihoods, and using machines together with humans to create better outcomes for all. So the first real key point I want to make is that as a result of all this interactive intelligence, we really need to shift our thinking about value creation in the future from the conventional B2B to C, the business to consumer model that's really framed a large part of that thinking in the first three industrial revolutions, to in this fourth industrial revolution, thinking about what I call I to N to I. And now what do I mean by that? Well, it's clearly an individual, like in the example of the patient, to a very intelligent network back to the individual, all with the goal of creating outcomes of value to those individuals. And what's important here is to recognize that what it does is it puts the spotlight on interactions, which is at the core of value creation. And if you have kids, you probably have them taking remote learning today. So if you look at the education space, again, in a B2B2C model, me being a professor, for example, you focus on teaching to the students. The I to N to I really puts the spotlight on learning rather than teaching. So if you start with the student and the student learning experience, as some of you already probably experience as families, a lot of the class is async or asynchronous, can be done prior to the interaction live, like, for example, using Zoom, which has become popular as a result of the crisis. So when you start reimagining then, what education is like in the future, it's beyond the B2B2C teaching model to an I to N to I learning model. And in the I to N to I approach, you really have to put the spotlight on how interactions create value and better learning experiences and outcomes in that case, or in the case of the healthcare, better health outcomes for all. So there are really 5 facets of value creation through experiences in this fourth industrial revolution. We've talked about digital platforms as powering all these interactions. And then it's very important to recognize that these require enterprises to think ecosystems. And what I mean by that is that you need to think of the whole portfolio of services being offered as an ecosystem, and allowing other partners to plug into that ecosystem to be able to provide that unique service experience for people who actually experience your value proposition. So as a result, what it does is it puts the spotlight on the outcomes from that value creation process, not just merely delivering a value proposition to the customer, and then thinking about the impacts that it has on individuals, on businesses, and a society at large, as we'll see. So to drive this all home, let's just take a very quick example, and actually of a company called John Deere, which was from the first industrial revolution. It was founded in 1837, right in that age of mechanization. So if you fast forward to today, here's kind of what John Deere is doing with its offerings in this new age of digitalization. So as you can see in this example, the emphasis is shifting from just delivering a service offering to really how the farmer creates value in terms of their engagement, their whole journey, in terms of preparing the field, adding nutrients to the field, optimizing seeds, the whole irrigation process, harvesting, etc. So the point here is that on the one hand, you need these smart connected farm equipment systems, as you saw. But at the same time, what it does is it now shifts to the whole ecosystem of services that's being provided. And so no one company can provide it all. In fact, speaking of Microsoft, Microsoft itself, its vision is to empower organizations and individuals on the planet to achieve more. And so think of it as a meta platform provider. And so here, really, it's about John Deere working together with the likes of Microsoft or Google or Amazon, a lot of the other providers who provide a lot of these cloud computing technologies, for instance. But really, collectively, along with other enterprises that might provide seeds and pesticides and fertilizers and irrigation services, to really provide not just a solution for the farmer, but really outcomes that matter to the farmer. So yes, it's a solution, but it's orienting the farm management system towards the actual lived experiences of the farmer. So this idea of lived experience becomes now very crucial. And to just get a sense of it, I think it's very important to kind of really see it from the farmer's perspective. So let's just do that.
Azure FarmBeats combines information from IoT devices, insights from machine learning, and serves it up in a way where other platforms are able to build off of it and help make a farmer more productive. The sensors measure temperature, wind, rain, humidity, soil moisture and soil temperature, CO2 levels, the solar intensity as well. One of the ways that the model can help make better decisions is temperature predictions. So that model will then tell you, oh, it's going to freeze tomorrow morning, and it's going to freeze, in the lower area. The whole field is not the same. So this year, when I have multiple sensors in one field, what I noticed was the soil profile on the top of the hill was different than on the bottom of the hill. And usually what we do is we plant the whole field the same, but it was so different that I seeded fewer plants up higher in the field and seeded more down lower. And then I could track it throughout the year with drone flights and with yield data at the end of the year. The big surprise is I didn't think it looked as good, but when I harvested it, the data allowed me to get a much higher yield than I was expecting. It's a very counterintuitive idea that you have fewer plants and yet they produce not just more, but they were producing twice as much. It's just the first year, but if I can do this every year, that's something that's really going to help our farm a lot. The way my dad used to farm and figure out what was going on in every field was he would walk through the field. So being able to know, what the soil moisture is like at a field that's 20 miles away is very beneficial to me. Family time for me is very important. I have 2 little kids, 2 little boys. Being able to save that time allowed me to spend more time with my family. I love being a farmer. I wish that it were easier sometimes, but that's why I harness every tool available to make it easier and make it something where I can continue farming.
One of the important points this makes is that while we've so far talked about the offerings as platforms that create interactive experiences in these ecosystems of services, that to really create valuable impacts, you really need to see how people actually experience this in their daily lives. So in the case of the farmer, it's really connecting with the farmer's own lived journey of actually engaging through these platforms and trying to understand what is the outcome that's of value to the farmer. So in a nutshell, what this does is shifts our thinking from this traditional B2B2C value creation of goods and services towards this I2N2I experience ecosystems, but of lived experiences. So this concept of lived value is super crucial because that kind of defines the value creation space moving forward. And one of the things that I have always been very interested in is this shift towards lived value creation. It turns out that back at the turn of the new millennium, the late Professor C.K. Prahlad, whom you see on the screen here, a professor at Ross, he and I began exploring this kind of future of value creation, future of competition in terms of how value is going to be created forward back in 2000. And as you all know, in 2006, Times Person of the Year was you. And literally the cover said you. And it really said that we had this new world of like interactions, really. And then the rest is history, starting from 2007 with smartphones and big data and the advent of sensor-based computing, etc. So all of those things have kind of fueled this kind of interactive intelligence. And as you saw from the Deere example, data is critical to kind of fueling this value creation in the future through these platforms. But that data has to be turned into insights and improved decision-making, as you saw. And so as you start shifting to that value of the data in the lived journeys of the experiences, it kind of decenters value creation. And it really puts the focus on the outcomes and the impacts. And now we are on to kind of something even more important than that as we start putting the spotlight on the outcomes and impacts that create value for experiencers, we need to democratize value creation. And what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, if you think about it, if you are just delivering a good or service and now you start shifting towards the outcomes, what it does is for example, from the farmer's perspective, the farmer is really interested in the outcomes on his or her farm. So from that point of view, that's what the farmer actually cares about. Really wants access to that ecosystem so that the farmer can generate the impacts that's of value to him. And of course, the entire players in the ecosystem. So it's really then about co-creation. How do you actually then create value with all of these moving parts, different stakeholders in the system? And so I spent a lot of time looking at that, and you can see agriculture is one of the sectors I researched. There are like over 20 sectors I featured in this book called The Power of Co-Creation with my co-author Francis Guya. And we looked at over 40 organizations. And what we actually saw was that every organization, a decade ago was starting to see the shift and trying to build some form of capabilities to be able to engage stakeholders in creating value together. And one of those organizations is Philips. And if you think of Philips, you think of light bulb. You go back to the second industrial revolution with electric power. And today at Philips Lighting, which is spun off as now Signify, essentially it's all about light as a service. So if you think about the outcomes in the case of light, it's really illumination and what experiences it actually creates for the person that's actually utilizing the light. So today they essentially sell lumens and not just kind of light bulbs, and their entire business model is aligned with that of the customer so that you create mutual value. And what that does is put the whole spotlight on working together jointly to create value through co-creation. So let's just take a look at the case of Signify.
In our experience, co-creation is a transparent process of value creation in an ongoing, productive collaboration with all relevant parties and with end users playing a very central role. So in other words, it's about involving customers, consumers, but also internal parties such as marketing, design and research, engineers, in every phase of a full development process. And we refer to this as complete co-creation. Co-creation is the most efficient and effective way to close the gap between what we think are great propositions and what our customers and end users think are great propositions. A city that is co-created will look and feel different than those who are not co-created. It can be nuances, it can affect major decisions, but ultimately a city exists in service of those who live there, and it shapes itself around their needs, which will create a much deeper relationship between the city and the citizens. So there will be an open, continuous conversation between citizens, organizations, the municipality, and everyone will on an equal basis collaborate to create a city that is empathic to all, which will make a much more desirable place to live. Cities should invest in co-creation because they have the responsibility, just like we do, to make sure all citizens find their place in society and can participate in improving what influences their lives. Complete co-creation is the ideal way to achieve that.
What this example actually reveals is that given the crisis we are in, one of the other convergences is that of society, economy, business in all spheres, right? So you're really looking at this convergence of the private and public and plural sector. And so in the case of Signify, as they have now built out their offerings and their new business models, it's all around creating platforms. In fact, they have a platform that we'll see shortly called Interact, and that's my last example. And in the case of the Interact platform, what they have realized is that this is something that is actually embedded in the infrastructure of our daily lives. And so we really have to embrace a co-creation paradigm of interactive experience value creation. And this is something that I've been researching for the last 5 years, together with Kiranjan, who was a student at the University of Michigan. So I think increasingly companies will find themselves working in terms of these ecosystem service models, but in doing so, you're going to see a blurring of the boundaries between the private sector, the public sector, and the plural sector. And to just kind of drive that point home, we'll take a look at the example of Signify Interact. And just to put that example in perspective, it's got two parts to it. One is the fact that we are increasingly moving towards lived experience value creation, as we've been discussing, but also that every enterprise has to become a living enterprise. And what I mean by that is that you have to engage all stakeholders in innovating value from the perspective of their lived journeys, as we discussed, but also create sustainable developmental impacts that ultimately drive well-being in society and economy. So let's take the example of Interact City, and the case of New York City specifically, and the New York Power Authority.
Smart Street Lighting New York was announced by Governor Andrew Cuomo in his 2018 State of the State. The state has more than 1 million streetlights, so this effort will have a major impact across New York. To achieve the governor's goal of replacing at least 500,000 streetlights by 2025, NYPA has created a full turnkey service to help communities with the acquisition, design, construction, and financing of converting their streetlights to LEDs.
When we first started the streetlight conversion project, it was about reducing our carbon emissions. But as we looked at the technology and as we saw what was possible, it really became about a social justice and equity issue. We're about 70% through the conversion, and we've already seen $2 million in savings. And that's part of equity too, right? If we can ensure that we're reducing our costs, that provides us with funding to make sure that we're able to settle our union contracts and pay just wages to our employees, and then have resources to focus on issues that are important to our neighborhoods.
What we're looking to do in White Plains right now is to explore every opportunity we can find to do our part to try to decrease carbon in the atmosphere, to try and make the city a safer place. We have to look for ways to save money. Many cities are in situations where even issuing bonds can be a problem because of their debt limit and things like that.
And NYPA came and actually did a whole matrix for us explaining how much money we can save by moving ahead with this all at once. The savings would outweigh the cost of the program, including the installation and the purchase of the fixtures.
The lights are probably good for 25 years. You're getting a better quality, a better outcome. You're saving the taxpayer money both immediately on the electric savings, but long-term on the maintenance savings. Our lights were completely deployed in about a 9-month span, and it was done with really no impact on our staffing.
Streetlights are an important asset within a community, as they are typically installed throughout all the neighborhoods. The streetlight system acts as the critical backbone for smart city deployment by providing the physical infrastructure to install IoT devices.
The lamps allow us to attach other technology. So in areas where we have lack of access to the internet, it opens up the possibility for us to find a partner who can provide internet services in our lower income neighborhoods.
Cobra heads, we converted about 9,600. In the next phase, we continue to pursue smart city initiatives. I think this is just the beginning, and hope Interact continues to advance so we can take advantage of those things.
I wanted to plan for the city of the future. We need to ensure that we're investing now for generations to come.
I think the point here is that efficiency is not opposed to living innovation and creating well-being for all. And so I'd like to basically conclude with this kind of declaration of interdependence of lives and livelihoods, that all organizations must become living enterprises, that engage all stakeholders in this living innovation process to create these sustainable development impacts through all the examples that we saw. And so they have to engage in co-creating well-being if they are going to thrive in this post-COVID digitalized world as it is becoming in the fourth industrial revolution. And so I think that's the opportunity that's available to all of us. And so I just want to wish everybody all the very best in co-creating the future, our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. I think your message of co-creating the future is a theme of all our speakers today.